All right, well, thank you guys for joining us this evening. I am Miranda Hess from Lehigh County Intellectual Disabilities. I am one of the co-facilitators of the Lehigh Valley Supporting Families Collaborative, and I'm going to turn it over to Emily to introduce herself. And then we have two special guests presenting tonight as well.
Hi, everyone. I'm Emily. I'm Miranda's counterpart at Northampton County. So like she mentioned, we work together for the regional collaborative. We have a lot of information to go through today. And for our presenters, we have representatives from Service Access and Management and Quality Progressions. I'll let them introduce themselves as I get the presentation ready. So take it away, guys.
Hi, my name is Tess Kehoe. I work for Service Access and Management, also known as SAM Inc., one of the local supports coordination organizations. I am an onboarding, outreach, and quality manager, so I onboard a lot of our new staff, but I started out as a supports coordinator, so I am intimately familiar with the ISP process, as is Chris, and it's been many years since I've written one, but I train all of our new staff at SAM on how to write one, how to read one. So I'm looking forward to sharing that with you guys tonight.
And I'm Chris Ellis. I work for Quality Progressions as a supervisor. Prior to that, I was an SC as well. I've been here for almost 15 years, so I'm very familiar with this process. Yeah, so we look forward to presenting to you guys tonight.
So what we're going to start with, just kind of the topics that we're going to cover having to do with an ISP is, first of all, what is an ISP or an individual support plan? We do use a lot of acronyms. So if I'm using an acronym that you guys aren't familiar with, please throw something in the chat and I will try to do better. We're also going to talk about the life course framework. There are a lot of life course tools. I'm not sure if some of you may already be familiar with life course framework. They can be super helpful in developing a very person-centered ISP. So we're going to talk about how we use those and how they can help in that process. We're going to talk about the ISP timeline and a little bit of just basic information about information that's captured in the ISP itself. There are very specific rules from ODP, the Office of Developmental Programs, about information that must be discussed in every ISP meeting, the timeline of when the meeting should occur, specific paperwork that must be completed, what information you should be bringing to an ISP meeting as a supporter of a person that we're serving. And we'll also go over the ISP approval process. And kind of all the different eyes that will look at that plan and maybe tweak some of the stuff that's in there before it's actually completed and updated all the way. And we'll actually, at the end of the training, we're going to look at a really well done ISP as an example as well.
So what is the purpose of the ISP meeting? It's meant to be a guide for supporting the individual. It is used as a training tool for supporters as well. So what we like to say is if for whatever reason someone needed somebody to assist with care, they would be able to read this document and have a pretty good view of what is needed to take care of the individual. It's as encompassing as we can possibly make it. You know, of course, we can't cover every little detail, but we try to hit the big points. The ISP is a living, breathing document. So that means that throughout the year, it should be updated as things change. So you would reach out to your supports coordinator, who is the only team member that can make changes. If there's any information that should change throughout the year that you feel is important to add, you would reach out to the supports coordinator and they would make those changes for you. If you see mistakes, the ISP is a large document. There's a lot of information covered at the meetings. If you see any mistakes, please feel free to reach out to your supports coordinator and they can make those changes because we want it to stay as accurate as possible. Things to be aware of. The ISP, again, it's a longer document. It can be repetitive. you're going to be covering a lot of the same information over and over again. We try to cut down on that as much as possible, but sometimes it's unavoidable. Also, we try to avoid using jargon. Like Tess said, we have a lot of acronyms, a lot of abbreviations for things. We try to stay away from those. Sometimes they're unavoidable, but we do our best. If there's ever any wording that you don't understand or you feel like could be modified, just reach out to your coordinator and they can help with that.
So the purpose of an ISP, Chris kind of touched on it in the last slide. It really is meant to be the guide to how to support this person. So it really needs to be very specific. We're very well aware that every individual that we support is unique and has their own set of unique needs and wants and desires. And so we really, no ISP should be taking any kind of a cookie cutter approach. There are a lot of very specific sections of the ISP that are looking for very specific pieces of information, which we'll get into in a little bit. But we want the plan to be person-centered. We want to, in developing the plan, we want to kind of narrow in on what is this person's vision for a good life. And that's where using life course tools can really help us to do that. What are the ultimate goals that they're working towards, maybe long-term? And so we can look at that, and then that will help to inform the team of what kind of supports do we need to put in place now, or that do they need in order to get there eventually? What do they need to live a good everyday life? That looks different for every person. And so we want the ISP to be really reflective of what that looks like for each individual. In developing outcomes or goals, as I mentioned before, for them to work on, can help to achieve that vision for a good life. So they may have this really lofty goal ultimately that they're working towards, but they need to work on smaller things now to help them to get there. That can help us as a team to kind of develop those outcomes. And we want those outcomes to be preference-based, based on the preferences of the individual. So the life course framework really helps us to use that person-centered approach amongst other tools. There are a ton of life course tools that are available. We'll look at a few of them in a couple more slides, but that can really help the team to hone in on what are the specifics that this person needs and really get really specific about their needs and what kind of support that they need.
So what is the ISP timeline? So everybody has an annual review update date. You'll hear us refer to it as the ARU for short. It's unique to that person. It's typically based on about around the time that you were enrolled into the system. So everybody's date is unique. It'll fall around the same time every year. The invite has to go out 30 days prior to the meeting occurring. This gives us an opportunity to gather information and other team members to gather information that's needed to go over at the meeting. And also hopefully have dates available where all team members can participate. An overview of the life course tool will be included in your invite letter that you receive. And then the meeting will occur at least 90 days before the ARU date, the annual review update date. And that gives the coordinator a chance to thoroughly update the plan, go through it, and make sure everything is accurate. It is then sent to the county for approval, which we'll get into more later. After the approval, you will either be mailed or emailed a copy of the ISP. It goes to the individual typically. If anyone else on the team should need it, you can request that. The meeting repeats annually. So every year we go over it in order to make sure that it's up to date and accurate. But as we said in a previous slide, changes can be made at any time that there are changes to the person's life. So feel free to request those changes at any point. The first meeting, we call it the plan creation. This is typically we're starting from scratch. So this meeting is going to be the longest meeting again, typically, you're going to be asked a lot of questions. The coordinator's trying to get to know the person and write the plan from scratch. So it's going to be a lot of information to cover. So plan accordingly when it's time to schedule that meeting.
And I do just want to add to something that Chris has mentioned a couple of times, that the ISP is a living, breathing document. So of course, we're going to update it after that annual review meeting where the whole team meets together. But we'll also be updating it throughout the year. You know, if the supports coordinator is in touch with you, or they're coming out for what we call a monitoring visit, and there's things that are discussed that are changing with the individual, then we should be going back, the SC should be going back and updating that in the plan, so that any given time, that plan is reflective of this individual's their reality and what's going on with them and what their preferences are and what's important to them. So I can't emphasize enough that it's not just updated once a year after that annual meeting. It's updated throughout. But the annual meeting gives the team a chance to work collaboratively. And sometimes it is the only time of year where all the team members are in the same place at the same time. And so it's just kind of a unique time for everybody to give their perspective. As far as the structure of the meeting goes, every supports coordinator has their own approach and style. I always say when I'm training new supports coordinators that there are many different ways of doing the same thing, but the same information will always be covered in every annual review meeting. Life course framework tools will be reviewed and used during the meeting. And there is very specific paperwork that the state requires us to review with the individual and the team. Some of that paperwork will just be provided as information for informational purposes and doesn't need to be signed in return. Some things will require a signature and we will take back with us. And then there really is a lot of discussion about what has shown progress over the last year, what maybe are some barriers that the person is experiencing, challenges, successes, and really kind of taking a bird's eye view of everything going on with the individual.
So what is the life course framework that we've been talking about? We're going to show you in a couple slides what it actually looks like, but it's a person-centered planning tool. And this goes along with the ISP. The ISP is person-centered. It is unique to every individual. Every person has their own story. Every person has their own background, their own needs. So every ISP is very unique to the person. The ISP development also helps the team identify what the person wants to live their best life. We all strive for that, and our individuals that we care for are no different. So that's what the development of the ISP is for. Some important things to keep in mind. The individual should always have a say. We always encourage the individual to take part in the ISP meeting, to the best of their ability. Some people are able to more than others. Some people have a tolerance to stay for the meeting more than others, but we want the person to be there and participate as much as they are willing to. What will be covered is, what does the individual need to live a good everyday life? And then, as we mentioned before, goal and outcome development to help achieve that vision for a good life.
So we keep mentioning these life course tools. We really strongly believe, as does ODP, that combining the use of the life course framework and life course tools with developing the ISP can help to lead to a really good everyday life for the individuals that we're supporting. I really there are some very specific tools that I prefer. There's so many that are available out there. What you're looking at on the right-hand side of the screen is an example of a one-page profile. Pretty much all of the life course tools come in a format of either getting a family perspective or getting the individual perspective. Sometimes there's value in using both of those. But this specifically looks at, what people like and admire about my family member. sorry, it's really hard to read because it's so tiny. What I believe is most important for anybody supporting them to know, and what are the best strategies in supporting my family member. So this is just one of the tools. But what I really enjoy about using a life course tool is just that it can really help facilitate good collaborative conversation. You know, you guys know the individual better than anybody. And so I think sometimes, you know, if we are going into reviewing an ISP, significant preparation goes into preparing for that meeting. Supports coordinators will, you know, come up with a list of questions that they want to ask you, but it can be rather dry to just ask a question, get the answer. This can really help facilitate good conversation about what it actually looks like to support the individual. And that's what we want to capture, and that's what we want to take back and make sure is present in the ISP.
And here's another part of the life course, the vision and trajectory portion of it, where we cover some past life experiences that got the person to where they currently are, and then how the person can move forward to once again achieve that best life. So, you know, a list of goals that they would like to achieve, things that can be put in place to help support the individual. We're also going to go over things to avoid, to get, you know, we don't want to go into a bad, you know, a bad trajectory. So things that we can use to avoid in order to prevent that. So, and then on the right, it's a infographic about the trajectory itself, you know, trajectory towards a good life, trajectory towards things you don't want.
So in terms of who should attend the ISP meeting, ultimately the choice is up to the individual of who they want invited. And we do try to emphasize that. Is there anybody else that you'd like to attend? Typically, you know, the individual is expected to attend their ISP meeting, but as Chris mentioned, you know, some of our folks really do struggle to, it can be a lengthy meeting, struggle to stay for the whole time. You know, we want them to be there for as much of it as possible because it's their meeting. We're just facilitating it. Any, you know, family members, caregivers, parents, guardians, siblings, as long as the, you know, the individual, you know, wants to make sure you guys are there, it's super valuable to have your participation. If it is somebody that is school age, we can absolutely include a teacher or classroom aide if they are able to attend. That can be extremely helpful to see, you know, what kind of support they need in an environment that's not the home environment. If they do receive paid services, the expectation is that there will be at least one representative from every paid provider that is working with the individual, at least paid through the ODP service system, the Office of Developmental Program Service System. And what we try to encourage is that it's not just, you know, some higher level staff member, but somebody that is also actually working with the individual and spending the most time with them, because they often have really valuable input as well. And again, if there's anybody else that isn't included in this, this is not an exhaustive list. You know, sometimes we have had individuals request that other natural supports come in, family, friends that know them very well, somebody who's been an excellent advocate for them. And so, you know, we will absolutely invite who the individual is requesting that we invite as well.
So now we're going to go over the different sections of the ISP. We aren't going to go in depth on every single section, but we wanted to give an overview, what to expect as far as what will be asked of you at the meeting. So the first section is the individual preferences, and this is the basic framework of what is needed to assure that the individual's needs are met. At least I say when I'm doing an ISP meeting, if you have 5 minutes to get to know somebody, this is the area that you want to read in order to basically get a very basic understanding of what the person needs and to support them. Also, what the individual wants and does not want in their life. We will be going over preferences in this area, activities that they like to do, things to avoid. Again, pulling kind of from the life course framework that we discussed earlier.
So the next kind of overarching section of the ISP that has a bunch of smaller subsections in it is medical information. So some of the information that we would need to have in this overarching section of the ISP is any medical or psychiatric diagnoses that the individual has, any medications that they are prescribed, doctors, any medical protocols that are in place. If they have a seizure disorder, is there a certain response that somebody supporting them would need to know of what to do if they were having a seizure? If they are diabetic, is there a blood sugar protocol that anybody supporting them would need to be aware of? Those are just some examples. What is their current health status? So when we're talking about current health status, we're looking at like what has been happening with them health-wise over the last year to present. And then developmental, what about further back? You know, sometimes it's really important to know a person's medical history to understand what's happening now. And then also kind of rounding that out with their psychosocial information. Is there any particular approach that staff needs to use because certain things can be triggering for an individual? Are there any significant behaviors that anybody supporting them should know about and know how to respond to that is unique to that individual? We also, include information on immunizations as well. And so it's things to be aware of to kind of know and come prepared with into an ISP meeting.
Sorry. So the next section is the health and safety. This is kind of a broader section. There are a lot of different categories in it. It's basically, we're going to be going through different scenarios and discussing what is needed to keep the person safe. Some of the examples, there's fire safety, water safety, traffic safety, assistance around meals and eating. So again, if there's a feeding protocol or something like that. Stranger awareness, would they wander off with a stranger? Would they be able to call 911 and ask for help? Do they have identification that they can carry with them? Let's see, knowledge of their self as far as, do they know their home address and do they know their phone number or their parents' phone number? Sensory concerns, especially our individuals with autism, if they don't like loud noises or bright lights or something like that, that's going to be covered. And then just an overall, like an overview of their staffing needs in general. So what do they need, around the clock or specifically in the community versus home or at school. And it's very important to be specific in these areas. This is, again, a tool that is used, by supporters to keep the person safe. So we want as much detail as we can in these areas, so that people working with the individual they have all the knowledge they need to take care of the person.
Thought I unmuted there. The next overarching section of the ISP is the functional information section. So what this focuses on is a lot of it focuses on their activities of daily living and what kind of support they need in all of these areas. And as you can see from the picture here, thinking about in terms of bathing, dressing, transferring, meal prep, any incontinence care that's needed. And we get really specific in these sections. What skills and abilities does the individual have in all of these areas? And what kind of support do they need in all of these areas, if any? There's also several sections in here devoted to communication. These sections are so important for the individuals that we support. Even if the person is verbal, if they are a verbal communicator, we really need to get very specific. I think that sometimes we may overestimate how much somebody is understanding from what's being communicated to them if they are verbal. So what about their expressive versus their receptive communication skills? Are there any special considerations that somebody should be aware of when communicating with the individual? And I always like to ask in an ISP meeting, is there anything that this individual says or does that would need to be translated, for lack of a better word, for an unfamiliar person? That is really important to know in supporting an individual. Are there any modifications or communication devices that are needed to help them to communicate? Some that can go from really basic to much more complex. Is there any adaptive equipment that they require? Are there any modifications in your home or your vehicle that they require in order to be able to, safely participate in the world around them? What kind of support do they need to learn new skills and to make decisions, including, skills in terms of money and understanding money denominations? Do they need support in that area? What kind of support would they need to develop and maintain relationships? Do they need support in order to maintain good, appropriate boundaries? And then what are their vocational and educational needs and abilities? Does the person have a competitive job? Is that a goal of theirs? Is that something they want to do? Are they in school now? What are they working on? Are they participating in work-based learning? Are they doing any volunteer work? So we're looking at all of these areas in this functional information section.
The next section then is financial. Are they able to manage their own finances? This is everything from handling money, for day-to-day activities, to broader things like paying their bills or maintaining a checking or savings account, things like that. If there's a representative payee, we would need their information here, and we would add that contact information to the plan. Do they receive Social Security or do they receive disability? If so, what is the amount for that? That kind of helps us when somebody is looking at waiver services, we can kind of gauge their financial caps in order to maintain eligibility for those. And then what other sources of income do they have? This can be wages if they work. It can be things like special needs trusts, inheritance, any number of things. We also will ask about burial accounts and life insurance and other things like that the person may have, because a lot of that will determine eligibility later on for services.
So the final section of the ISP is the service and supports section. And the one that we focus on the most in here is their outcomes or their goals. Part of what we do at the annual ISP meeting is developing new outcomes for the coming plan year. So these, I mentioned at the beginning of our presentation that we really want these to be preference driven based on the preferences of the individual. And so the team, will work together to determine what that might be for the individual. And, the individual may be able to say for themselves exactly what they want to work on over the next year. And we can kind of build an outcome based around that. Outcomes should be measurable. So how do we know if they're making progress on this outcome? What does that look like? And so there will be discussion about what might be realistic as a measure for progress for an outcome. There often are multiple outcomes based on what the individual would like to accomplish. Usually, I typically see at least 2 outcomes, but I've seen a lot more than that, depending on what the individual wants to work on. Some outcomes can be very specific and work on one very specific area, and they can also be much more broad. So typically, when we see more broad outcomes, we'll see fewer of them just because they're working on a lot of things in each outcome.
So everybody's favorite topic, paperwork. So there's a lot of paperwork at the ISP meetings. It is part of every meeting, every ISP meeting. and we go over annually. Most of these forms you're gonna receive multiple times over the years, so just be aware of that. A couple of things that we go over. The first one is the ISP sign-in sheet that just gives us a record of who attended, and on the back there is a questionnaire over basically going over with the team what has been covered, and that's specific to each person depending on their funding stream. You also receive a fair hearing form. So if the person receives services and there are any changes in services made during the ISP meeting that you don't agree with or are denied, you can request a fair hearing. There's a form called the 457 form. It's service preference. This is typically completed once, but if you should change your mind at any point, we can do it again. But this basically indicates whether or not in the future the individual would like to be considered for waiver services. There's a voter declination form. Everybody over the age of 18 has the right to vote, whether they have a disability or not. So we offer that as a choice. That we typically hand out the actual voter enrollment form as well at the ISP meeting if the person is interested. You will also receive releases of information. Typically, this is for this can be for any number of things. This can be for doctors. This can be for providers. If the person has other outside services that you feel we should be communicating with or receiving forms from, we can have a release of information signed for them. HIPAA information will also be covered, basically what we are going to be going over at the meeting, who is going to be given this information or have the ability to see it. The priority of urgency of needs for services. It's you'll hear this referred to as the PUNS. This is gone over typically annually. If the person is interested in waiver services, it's a planning tool to determine funding in the future. So it kind of gives the state an idea of what to plan for moving forward, where the person is as far as their needs and what services they'll be looking at. And then this is kind of specific to the organization, whatever supports coordination organization you're working with. But there will be informational packets, frequently asked questions about different services, things about work-related topics, things about communication, service models, any number of things. I think each agency gives out different information. And then there's SCO, so supports coordination organization specific forms. So things like organizational charts, mission statements, we give out if you guys have any grievances and who to reach out to for those. So, there's a number of things that you're going to be getting. Again, it kind of becomes repetitive because you'll be doing it every year, but just be aware that this is what you'll be going over.
And we do try to come as prepared as possible. So we'll have that paperwork filled out as much as we possibly can. And your SC will explain everything that they're providing to you. In preparation on your end of things, it's good to come prepared with some specific information. Any recent medical appointments that have occurred, I would say over the last year, but typically you'll have more contact with your SC than that. So maybe since the last time you were in touch with them, their immunization history, or if there were any recent ones, any medications that they're currently taking or recent changes in their medication regimen, and copy of their IEP if they are in school, their individualized education plan, or their reevaluation report. I'd also like to include any other evaluations that they may have recently had, anything that is applicable, whether that is, for their communication, for physical therapy, even like what kind of, assistance they need in those areas. That can be really helpful.
So some financial documentation that is needed. and we discussed this a little bit in one of the previous slides. So if the person is receiving Social Security, what is the amount that they're getting? Again, this is important for eligibility later on. Other sources of income, such as I discussed, wages, special needs trusts, irrevocable burial accounts, life insurance, if they have an ABLE account as well. So we need all of that information in order to help with determining eligibility.
So the ISP approval process, it depends on, there are different kinds of ISP drafts that we can complete, and we complete them for different reasons. So the first meeting that we have with you, once you are assigned a supports coordinator, we are going to work on a plan creation. That's actually creating the ISP. Based on information that you may have provided to the county going through the intake process and the eligibility determination process. This is the kind of draft at the very beginning, and it's only ever done one time. Throughout the year, SCs will complete what we call general updates. These are the kind of drafts that they complete at any point if a change needs to be made, just to keep the information current. So if they come out to see you and you tell them that your son or daughter is no longer interested in an activity that they were previously participating in, and now they're really into a new activity, we're going to update that in the ISP. Just as we would update if they had a recent medical appointment or a medication change, we would do that in a general update. This is the only kind of draft that does not require the county to approve it. So this is the kind of draft that the SC will complete just to keep the information current. They will submit it. It will go straight to an approved status of that plan. A critical revision draft is the only time that we are creating that kind of draft is when there's a change in services that are funded through our service system. So if the individual is receiving paid supports through the ODP service system, and there's a change in the frequency or duration of that service that they're receiving, if we want to increase maybe the number of hours of the service or decrease it, we would complete a critical revision. Critical revision will change the dollars and cents in the plan. It'll change the person's total budget. The annual review update draft, that's what we've been referring to with this annual meeting. This is done one time per year. After the annual review meeting, the SC will come back to our office. They will create an annual review draft, and they will start to make all the changes that the team discussed at the annual review meeting. Again, this happens 3 months prior to the actual annual review date. So if they have an annual review update date of March 1st, that meeting should be happening on or about December 1st. And the last one is the fiscal year rollover. The fiscal year rollover is done one time per year. All of our ISPs and budgets rotate around the fiscal year. So right now we are in the 23-24 fiscal year. As we get closer to the end of fiscal year goes from July 1st of 2023 to June 30th of 2024. As we start to approach the end of the fiscal year, so usually April, May, we have to create a new ISP for the next fiscal year. So it's just taking the information in the current ISP and transferring it over to the new fiscal year plan. If there are paid supports, the budget restarts as of 7/1. And so we need to make sure all of that is calculated correctly.
Sorry, guys, I can't click on the link because it was all distorted, but I'm coming back. Basically, the couple resources that we have there, I can obviously go through them and share them. I just can't unmute myself and then show the presentation again. I was trying with the shortcuts and it wasn't working. But we have a couple of resources here to share, and obviously I can go through them. These are clickable links, and also too, after the presentation's done and once we have the recording ready, I can obviously include the slideshow on there so that you guys can have this for your reference, and also be able to, obviously be able to like click and kind of browse through each resource as you see fit. So I'm just going to go through the links a little bit so that way you guys can have a reference point as to what they're going to look like. So, the first one that we have here is the ISP manual. It is a very lengthy document. If you guys weren't previously aware, it's like 200 some pages. And it gives you like, this is kind of like the table of contents. So it gives you each section of the ISP process, the preparation for the ISP meeting, which Tess and Chris have been, discussing. There are a lot of information. There's a lot of information that, details that go into each section of the ISP that we didn't get into. But there's another form for that I'll get into in a little bit. Development of the ISP. So this is going to be like that initial plan creation meeting that was previously discussed. Different forms and things like that. The ISP approval process. So what that's going to look like. Miranda and I can kind of discuss what that looks like. And there's a bunch of other stuff that we didn't necessarily get into today, because we would be here for a very long time. But either way, we just wanted to get to the basics of the ISP. Should you guys want, to kind of read into it a little bit more, by all means, click on this link and then you'll be able to get the information there. There might be some jargon there, but you can always ask for clarification because I feel like a lot of these things are open to interpretation sometimes. The next form that we have here is the annotated ISP.
Emily, we can't see the forms that you're when you're clicking on them because I think you only have the PowerPoint shared.
Let me see. Sorry, I was talking to myself that entire time.
It's okay.
Sorry. Thank you. Okay. So how about now? I think we're good.
You're good.
Okay, awesome. So as I was saying, this is the annotated ISP form. I guess from previous experience for, as a supports coordinator, this was kind of the go-to form that you would bring to a meeting when you're completing a plan creation meeting or, completing the ISP. Basically, this is something that the SC can have with them. And it's not just limited to the plan creation meeting. It can be helpful at the annuals as well. It highlights all the different sections of the ISP. So Tess and Chris reviewed like these big domains here, like your individual preferences, medical information, health and safety, functional information. So if an SC is, using their computer, they can, click on these links and it'll jump to that section of the ISP. But just for demonstration, the SC can use this as a tool to kind of identify what goes in certain sections. So prime example right here, like and admire. What do others like and admire about the individual? It highlights, what kind of information should be in this section. And the SC can take notes and, so that they can go back and update the ISP with that information that they wrote down. Previously mentioned, other domains, that's going to be the same thing throughout the entire ISP, desired activities, things that are important to the individual, essential or strongly desired items. So there's a lot that goes into it there. We have here some additional life course tools, just like the basic framework. So I know there were some examples that were shown on the slides. However, there's a lot more on here. And there's always like a links here that you can use to reference more tools. And I guess also for the sake of the presentation as well, there was a presentation here, not sure or an ISP that was there, but we do have a ISP that was written by a supports coordinator for one newer individual through Northampton County. And I thought the SC did a really great job with kind of highlighting, the safety, what that individual needs to support wise, but also kind of capture them as a person, like what their personality is like. And it was awesome to see. And it's redacted, so we should be able, and I got permission from the family to share as well. So I should be able to provide that as a resource so that others can see what an ISP looks like. Obviously you can compare, what kind of information you want to include, what you don't want to include, and kind of see, how your ISP can benefit your loved one, how it kind of highlights them as a person. So that's kind
And
of all the attachments there.
we can make sure too that after the presentation, we always send out the link for the recording and a copy of the PowerPoint. So obviously those links should be active in the PowerPoint copy that you receive. So you can click on those links and check out all those resources, including, I believe that the redacted ISP was on the PowerPoint, or at least when I looked at it before. So you should be able to look at all of that stuff.
Tess has it too, so we can do a quick a quick overview. So, because it does look different in different ways for people. So like families may have just a parents may just have like a physical copy. However, this is kind of what it looks like on our electronic software. So obviously you have like your cover page. I remember when this first blank box came into play, still don't know what it's for. However, basic summaries, you have like individual demographic information. Obviously we redacted that for privacy. You got all the personal information out there. So that's what those black boxes are. However, should you scroll further down, you get after all the demographic stuff and you get contact information. So your SC's typically listed on there as well. Your paid providers, any family members, any type of main contact that your individual may have on their team, they would go in that section.
Hey, Emily, this is Mimi
yes.
Ludwig. As you're
Hi.
going through this, can you explain a little bit to parents on here why so much information is needed? Because over the years, I think people have asked a lot of questions like, why do they need to know everything? And there's a real good reason. Maybe you can explain.
Yeah, absolutely. So like Tess and Chris mentioned before, this document is going to be a training support tool for anyone who's going to work with the individual. So as an example, let's say your loved one has a waiver and it has paid waiver services. The provider is going to use the ISP in order to get to know the individual. So during the referral process, they're going to ask for the ISP. It also provides, like we mentioned, like the health and safety concerns. So like it should have basically everything on there in order to properly support the individual. So if we reference the know and do section, we include normally diagnoses. So this person specifically has an intellectual disability, Down syndrome, arthritis, heart condition, things of that nature. So we want to know if there are any major health conditions. So someone has a seizure disorder. So if I'm reviewing this as a plan reviewer and I see a seizure disorder, that should kind of like trigger in my brain, is there a seizure protocol that we should be looking for? Medications, or are there any emergency medications? Who can administer them? We want to know if there's going to be specialized training required, because some individuals may have nursing support, so they may need like a skilled nurse to do like med administration, G-tube feedings, things of that nature. So we want to make sure we highlight all of those things, and just so we get to know the individual a little bit more. So, what their communication style is like, what they're interested in doing. So if we look at this section here, we have that third paragraph where it says blank has basic verbal expressive language skills. Obviously, that'll highlight how she communicates. And if anyone's reading this ISP, they can kind of learn, okay, how can I communicate with this individual? And they'll be able to either understand me, but then also for me to understand them. Wanting to do, day programs so they can make friends, what the supervision needs are. Diet is also a big one, because we want to make sure that diets are followed. This is especially prominent for our individuals in residential, because we want to make sure that their diets are being followed by the provider. So the provider would need to know, let's say if they're a diabetic, if they need to have like a low carb, low sugar diet. If they're overweight, should they follow a low fat diet, things of that nature. Another thing to note as well is like at the plan creation meeting, in that paragraph there, we normally review everything that's reviewed at that annual meeting. So that voter status, the wait list for funding, choice of providers, right to a fair hearing, All of those things need to be reviewed on an annual basis. And also too, for our waiver funded individuals in this section of the know and do, we also typically include service details. So that can include like the service that they're receiving, what the frequency of the service is, who the provider is. All of those details also go in this ISP. This person does not have a waiver. So that's why that information isn't listed on there. We also include, the SC provider is there, just so that people can know who the supports coordination organization is. But as you can see, like it says, this person is SC only. So that means they only receive supports coordination services at this time. And then, as things change, the SC can always update all of that information. I hope that provides some insight. I know I only focus on that know and do section. However, the ISP in its entirety is typically has all this information. So I'll be sure, we'll make sure that this example is listed with all the other contents for tonight's presentation. So that way you guys can reference, what kind of information we're looking for. So I know that is a lot, so you don't have to read the entirety of the ISP, but if you feel so inclined to, there's an example here. I think Miranda and I can also speak to what the plan review process is like at the county level, because I'm sure people have probably noticed that there's a huge gap between the ARU date and then when the meeting's actually happening. So if, just as a quick recall, the meeting typically happens 3 months prior to the ARU date. So ISP meetings that are happening now are probably in October, are probably for people who have annual review update dates from November, December, January. So those are people who have plans due in January. And the reason for that gap is just so that there is enough time for everything to go happen, basically. So you have your ISP invite letter that needs to go out 30 days. Your SC needs to have the meeting. Your SC needs to complete the update. After the update is completed, the supervisor will review the plan. Once the supervisor reviews the plan, it gets submitted for the county to review. Then the county also has to review the plan. So there's a lot of eyes on the plan. So we just want to make sure that there's enough time for that entire process to take place. So that's kind of why there's that huge gap. In terms of, again, plan review, everyone's going to be a little bit different. Everyone has their own style. I think, Tess captured that very well, where like SCs have their own unique style. I know Miranda and myself both have SC experience, but counties do things a little bit differently. So even though we all operate under the same guidelines, we may do things a little bit differently. You'd be surprised how we do things here in like Lehigh and the Lehigh Valley compared to like Allegheny. So that's something, to always keep in mind. And yeah, I think I captured a lot, but did I miss anything?
So I'm just going to add on to that last part that you said about how, like different counties do things differently. So a lot of that is, we all have the same regulatory requirements that we're trying to follow. But what we found is over the years, different counties have kind of developed their own processes and things that they look for, because we have a process called QA&I, it's quality assessment and improvement. And basically that's when the state comes in and kind of audits all of our stuff and tells us what we need to do a better job with. So typically when you see a county that like really fixates on one thing that seems kind of strange and it doesn't really make sense why the county's fixated on that one thing, it's usually because many, many years ago, the state came in and told that county that they had to pay special attention to that thing. So we have things in our county that we might ask for or look for that other counties might not ask about at all, because at one point it could have been 6 or 8 or 10 years ago, the state came in and said, you guys aren't doing a good enough job with this and you really have to fix that. So then we do fix it, but then we fix it forever going forward. So that's why you'll see differences among counties, even though we all follow the same regulatory guidelines. I know I saw Mimi just turned her camera off, but I know she had a question about dates. So once she's available, she can go ahead and unmute herself and ask that question. But does anybody else in the meantime have any questions about any of the material that we already discussed?
Miranda, I have a question.
Sure.
So with families that have an ISP, I'm very familiar with IEPs, obviously, but ISPs, if there's something in an ISP is written that the consumer has to be doing, or let's say the person lives in a group home and the group home has to provide this certain whatever it is, and they're not doing it. What do parents do after that? I was just wondering, like, I know for IEPs, where we go, but what do parents do for something if they know that something's not being provided, or the staff is saying, well, we don't want to do that? What are their rights, and what's the consumer's rights?
Yeah, so there's kind of two parts of that, right? So if the provider is not providing something that should be provided as specified in the ISP, then the family, the individual, whoever, should definitely notify the supports coordinator. And then there's a whole process through the individual monitorings. There's monitorings that are completed as part of the regulatory requirements. So as part of that monitoring, then the supports coordinator can enter what's called a monitoring issue, which basically says this is something that we've identified as a concern, and then the provider needs to address it. Different counties have kind of different processes for how they handle monitoring issues. I can tell you at Lehigh County, we ask supports coordinators to send every monitoring issue to both the plan reviewer, and we have a risk management team. So we have somebody who tracks the monitoring issues. If something is a monitoring issue multiple times in a row, then we'll issue the provider a corrective action plan. So, it's something like if the individual has a goal where they want to go swimming once a week and the provider's not taking them swimming or whatever, we might make that a corrective action plan, that the provider is being negligent in the person, like violating the person's rights, essentially a rights violation, not taking them to do the activity that they are asking to do. As far as what are the parents' rights and what are the individual's rights, that gets a little tricky because all adults receiving services have rights. So sometimes families think that their loved one should be doing a certain thing or getting a certain service or something like that, and the individual does not necessarily always feel the same way as the family. So unless the family is the legal guardian, then the individual has a right to refuse. So sometimes families get caught up in that. So it might be that the family's saying, well, I want Johnny to go swimming every week, and Johnny's saying, I really don't want to go. So then the staff isn't taking him because Johnny's refusing. So Johnny has a right to refuse. It's always important to keep in mind too, that even if somebody does have a legal guardian, staff can't force somebody to do anything. So even if Johnny's parents are his legal guardian and they're saying Johnny needs to go swimming every week, if Johnny's refusing, staff can't make him go. I mean, staff can't drag him out of the house and make him go swimming. So, there are sometimes those kinds of scenarios that are difficult to manage, but, I would just always recommend that the family or the individual have really good communication with their supports coordinator. That supports coordinator.
Thank you, Miranda.
Yeah, the supports coordinator is really the lead of the team. So they can, work as kind of a facilitator to try to overcome any of those conflicts, to resolve that kind of stuff. And if needed, they will contact the county and pull us in for meetings and things like that as well.
Okay, that's exactly what I told the mom to do. Thank
Yeah,
you.
no problem. So Mimi said that she cannot unmute right now. So she had just asked if I could state her question. So she had sent me a direct message. She wanted to ask about ARU dates and updating the ISP goals. And she said it took more than 6 months to get it updated because the ARU date was in late May, and then it ran into the fiscal year rollover time frame. So it took a long time to get ISP goals updated. So I think that I can maybe mention that also. I can maybe cover that. So sometimes we do have issues where if there's a plan that is in a draft status for some reason, you can't update it for another reason. So it's really a challenge. Because sometimes like the ARU update process can take a while. The supports coordinator has the meeting, but then actually updating the plan, like entering those updates can take a while. And then, if they miss something and they have to do an additional revisions, the process can be kind of lengthy. We recommend, and I don't know what Northampton County's process is for this, so Emily, you can speak about that. And I know different counties have different processes, but we recommend that supports coordinators allow the ARU to auto approve, so that it doesn't hold up that ARU approval process. Because sometimes it can take counties a while to get to the ARU. The issue is we have certain timeframes as far as approving the ARU and things like that also. But the SC has different guidelines as far as when it needs to be submitted. So the SC is supposed to submit the ARU at least 30 days prior to the ARU review date. But the county just has to approve the ARU by the due date. So a supports coordinator might submit the ARU like 45 days in advance, but our process at Lehigh is we review plans based on their due date, not based on when they're submitted. So we'll review the plans that are due the soonest first. So a plan might be submitted 45 or even 60 days before it's due, but we might not get to it for a while because there's so many other plans in the queue to be reviewed. So we always recommend let the ARU auto approve, and then you can submit a general update or a critical revision or whatever else you need to submit for that plan. So I apologize, Mimi, that your daughter's plan took a long time to get approved. It shouldn't take 6 months to update outcomes. But Emily, can you speak?
We appreciate that. I think part of it is because of when our annual renew date is, and I've been trying to change that so that we wouldn't fall into the abyss. And so I appreciate that thought.
I was gonna say my thought process, if the ARU date is end of May, that means the plan fell right around the fiscal time. So I guess.
And that's exactly what happens.
Okay.
And it gets very confusing. If you don't have a lot of changes, it's really not an issue and it has never been an issue. But now we had a lot of changes, and that's where it got to be difficult. So, normally it should not be an issue.
Yeah, so I guess in that scenario, I mean, I know when we were doing the fiscal rollovers, Northampton County's guidance was like to complete all the updates as a general update. I know that was my experience as well as a supports coordinator. Complete, because outcomes can be changed as a general update. It just depends. You can't change where your outcomes are attached to, if that makes sense. So different drafts will.
I think that's what happened, and that's why I wanted you to go over goals, because I think in this case we had a lot of changes, and it had to do with goals and how they were placed. So it was a little bit cumbersome, but I mean, I would like you to explain a little bit more how that works.
So I guess what Mimi is referring to, so the ISP that she had fell right during around the fiscal rollover time. I think Tess mentioned this before as well. So like our fiscal rollovers normally take place around April and May. So basically we have to take every single ISP and then carry it over to a new fiscal year. In Mimi's case, because her ISP date was in May and had to be carried over, it probably got lost into the abyss. I know also some people, if their ARU date is like July, you can't carry over a plan that doesn't exist yet because the rollover hasn't happened yet. So that's a lot of technicalities here at the county. So we try to figure it out. I know the SCOs are also closely involved because they create the drafts, and then the county has to review them. And because it was a leap year, that was a whole other scenario. So I think maybe your best bet is requesting a change in ARU date.
I did, but it will take a year for that to become effective.
Yeah.
And I think if as long as we don't make too many more changes, we're good.
Yeah, I mean, and the thing is too, you don't necessarily, let's say you want to change your outcomes or you want to add an outcome or something like that. You don't have to wait until the annual to do that. You know, if things change over the years, if you're like, hey, or like this outcome is no longer beneficial, or they've made progress and we want to update it, you can also do that during the year. You don't have to wait until your annual to do all of those things. So that's always something to know. There was a comment in the chat that I think is, you know, really insightful and helpful. A lot of families do not know about the rights of their child as an adult because they will see them as their child, which we do see. That's, you know, we do see that very often. Maybe a human rights pamphlet should be given so they can learn and see it differently. Just a thought. So speaking to that, we have an advocate in our group, Susan. So I just wanted to highlight her because I think, Susan, you might be, you know, a good resource for families or individuals specifically as well when it comes to, you know, being their advocate, you know, things like that. And I think also too, from as a supports coordinator lens, you always want to give the individual a voice and, you know, their preference. So that's always important to note as well.
Yes, absolutely, Emily. You're right. And I'm actually on the Human Rights Committee meeting at the ARC. So I've really learned a lot more about, you know, when you see a behavior plan and you have to look at it. But Migdalia, her statement is correct because families do. When I start talking to families like right before the age of 18, and I'll say to them, you know, when they turn 18, you're no longer their guardian. They don't understand that because they're like, but they have a disability. I said, I know, but, you know, and even myself, I learned from an attorney when we used to have him come to the ARC, but he has since passed away. Greg Reed always said, even your typical children should have at least power of attorney. And I never thought about that, but he's so correct, you know, because if something happens to them after 18, that they don't have to talk to you, the doctors. So yeah, we tried the ARC as well to really help families understand all that, but we're there to help anybody that needs, you know, we have an intake coordinator. So if anybody, and we also have webinars as well. So absolutely, we're there to support families in Northampton and Lehigh. So thanks for mentioning that, Emily.
Of course, I'm gonna promote you guys, you know.
Thank you.
Migdalia also raised her hand. I don't know if you want to unmute yourself if you wanted to add something.
Hi. I made that comment only because I'm in 2 human rights committees, and before that, I had made the mistake because as my daughter was growing up, you know, the iPad was the powerful thing. But when she got that age, and once I joined these committees, I was like, oh my gosh, I cannot do that anymore. So I totally stopped and try to work around it. But as a parent, you're going on and saying, okay, we're going to do it this way. This is working. But I think that if you're not in the Human Rights Committee and you don't hear it, you keep thinking, oh, this is working. I can do this. So I figured if a pamphlet can be made and just slipped in and say, you know, it's great that, you know, that they can listen, but they no longer are a child. So we can work our way into something else and not violate their rights.
Yeah, I think that's awesome insight. We do see it, you know, with families as well, because obviously you don't want to overstep the boundary, but at the end of the day, you know, their individuals are their own people. They have their own autonomy, ability to make their own decisions. So it's a fine line to say the least, but I think you bring up a very valid point.
Thank you.
Yeah. I guess any other questions? I mean, I know we've reviewed a lot today, so any last minute additions or anything like that, or any questions for our SCOs, you know, they're a valuable resource as well. So, you know, they're here too. I may take our silence as no. I guess I just want to say thank you to everyone for, you know, joining. Also, shout out to Tess and Chris for being here. You guys went through a lot, so we appreciate your time. It doesn't go unnoticed. And thanks for everyone for coming. The recording, Miranda, you may need to stop it before, in case we close out and then there's no recording, but I'll be sure to share, all the resources that were mentioned today, including the slideshow and the recording. Will be uploaded to the YouTube channel. And if you guys have any questions, feel free to reach out. Okay. With that being said, have a great night, everyone.
Thank you. Good night, everybody.
Bye.